Are you looking for a way to adorn your user identities with bonus claims? Let's mash on that.
Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of the Asp.Net Monsters. In today's episode, we're going to dig in a little bit to the claim factory.
Yeah, we're going to do that. Today, and it's cool because today we have both monsters on the call.
All two of them.
So I feel like there is some historical context needed for this because our viewers do not understand that we went down to the Microsoft MVP Summit and James and Dave were off talking to Richard Campbell.
Our good friend Richard Campbell.
Of .NET Rocks fame. And he turned to them and said, "Oh, look, it's both ASP.NET Monsters." Without me being there. So from that day forth, I am the superfluous, the supplemental ASP.NET Monster, if you will.
And then the kicker is that for probably the last 20 episodes of the ASP.NET Monsters, I haven't been around. So there's only been one monster on the call.
That's the ASP.NET Monster.
That's right. Okay, so what we're going to talk about here, we're going to talk about two things actually. We're going to talk about Claims Factory and we're going to talk about Claims Transformation. They play a different part part in the role of authenticating a user and of authorizing a user and of adorning claims onto the user. And so I want to talk about what that looks like. And I'll just show you what I did really quickly so that we can see the claims after we've added them to the user. And all I did here was just simply grab an instance of the user identity so I could iterate through the claims and dump them out into a table. So nothing here that you couldn't do anyways. Now, most of the time what happens is the claims that a user have will often be provided by your authentication store. So if somebody's logging in and they've got a tie into Azure, or they've got you're using identity server or something like that, then the server itself has the opportunity to build claims that will be attached to the user token when they authenticate to your app, and then you can access those through your application. You can look at all those claims. You can inspect who added them because there might be multiple identity providers involved. And then you have the chance to do whatever you want with them. For example, some of those claims might be roles. Some of them might be the username or a preferred name that the user goes by. Sometimes what you run into, though, is that you have an authentication source that happens outside of the application or even inside of the application. But in certain contexts, you may require adding additional information to the user. So there's two ways that we can do this that aren't terribly well documented, but if you noodle through the documentation and the odd dark corner of a closet in Stack Overflow, you can find this stuff. So I just thought it was a cool thing to kind of bring to light. We also just recently were working with a client and stumbled through a little bit of this and ran into some problems and some limitations. So we'll talk about that as well. So working in the Claim Factory, what we're doing is we're basically ultimately going to register the claims principal factory, the user claims principal factory, with our application as it starts up. And what this does is it actually subs out the claims factory that's already there, or rather it gives us an opportunity to extend that out. So what we do is we override the generate claims async, and then we can add some claims in here. So you can see here I'm doing a new claim. I'm just calling this one generated department because it's from our factory. I guess I could have called it factory department or something like that. And I put some static value. The reason why I put some static value in here is because this one is only going to happen when the user signs in. So if they have clicked that remember me, this is going to be sticky. And the thing to remember is that when we're generating these claims as part of the user identity, these ones are going to be added to the token that gets sent back to the user's browser. So what you don't want to do is something that's going to expand that cookie larger and larger and larger, which will end up crashing your application, as we recently found out. And instead, these are the ones that live with the user, and it goes out to their browser. All of the information is encrypted. You don't have to worry about so much about the value that's in here. Unless somebody's got access to the key ring on your server, they would not be able to decrypt the claims that are added to the user tokens and sent to the browser. Okay, so here's the first way to do it. Now, an important thing to know is that we're going to pass in the user manager and the role manager, because if you're using a version of identity that makes use of roles and makes use of other claims, you're going to want to call the base class method generate claims async first and make sure that we've properly adorned them with any of the existing claims that might have come in on that user identity as it hit our factory. So that's important because, again, if a user is in a certain set of roles, they've lost the role if you just create a new identity and send it out here. They would have lost any of the other claims that were generated as part of the user coming in with those tokens to your application and however those were decrypted. So I've got a breakpoint here. We're going to look at that when we sign in. And then this is the transformer. This is neither an Autobot nor a Decepticon, but what it does is it allows you to take the identity server side only and then add on any additional claims that you need so that you can process while the user's processing server side, you have access to those claims. Now, this is a better place to do things like resource management based off of claims. An example would be if there's a set of rows in the database that a user is allowed to access, adding keys as claims is a possible way to do it. Or if, for example, there's some way to group those together so you can have more of a broader kind of scope or whatever, a broader view of what the user is allowed to do, you can do that. In this case, I'm just adding this concept of a department in. And this actually was something that came from another resource that I was working on, another project that I was working on, where users were logging in from a third-party external service, and that was already provisioned outside of the application. But because we were using those identities inside the application, we needed to also add on the department, which came from a SQL server inside the bounds of the application, something that the application had access to. So we needed to know the department of the user, and so we were adding it in, and we did it in the claims factory, so it only happened one time when the user signed in. But here's another place where you can do it, and you can do it. This is going to happen, execute on every request, and these claims only live server side. They do not exist. They do not propagate up to the browser. So an important distinction there. The other thing I wanted to mention about what you generate in this token is because this could persist if they've clicked that little remember me button, because this could persist from session to session. It's possible that these claims aren't refreshed until the user actually logs out, or they open up an incognito window, or they switch browsers, or they switch devices, because that cookie will actually live with them until that session is logged out. Whereas with the claims the Autobot Decepticon version, this is actually getting refreshed on every execution of every request that the user comes in on. The caveat there is that if you're doing a database call per request, you have to be aware of the resource hit that you're going to do, or if you're calling out to some external service or whatever the case may be. So you may want to add some kind of caching layer in here if you've got some kind of latency that's introduced as part of adding claims. Finally, the last thing that we need to do, actually, I'll just kind of walk through this really quickly. We got an iClaims transformation implementation, and we simply need to do this transform async. And I had it marked up as an async because I was going to do some stuff with the database, but yet we can just prove it just by setting a breakpoint here and showing you guys how that happens. So I've added 2 scoped services here. I've also used so one of the things that you need to be aware of as well is that I'm using scoped. We can't use transient if we're using, you can't kind of cross over there. So if you're using any transient services, you have to use transient. You have to add this to the services as transient. And likewise, if you're going to do this as scoped, you can't use transient services because these are only created once per. So you just have to be a little bit aware of that. But I've added these ones as scoped. And here we've got our user claims principal factory of identity user, which is the supplemental department claim factory. And then we've got an iClaims transformation, which is the department claims transformer. So both of these are going to be executed and added. And the first one we're going to see is after I sign in. So I'm going to just, here I am, I sign in, and, I don't know if that's the right password or not. Still don't have much confidence. There we go. And once I hit server side, then I'm generating the claims for the claims identity. I'm going to return this back, and all I'm doing is adding on this extra claim here for the user. Then the next breakpoint that I'm going to hit is over in my claims transformer, and this one gets executed, and then it's, you know, something from DB, like it could be anything that you want here, really. And I'll hit run again, and then there I go. So here are the ones that were added by Asp.NET identity. It tells you, you know, that it comes from Asp.NET identity security stamp. You could do things like add the server, which actually authenticated the user, those kinds of things. But here you see the generated one that came with that static value, and then here's the transform department. So when I refresh the page, it's not going to revisit this one that it had to generate when it was creating my identity token, which you can see, by the way, if you pop in. Go to the network, I'll hit refresh here. So as I hit refresh and we're waiting for this page to reload, went back to the server, it is still going through the claims transformer that we did. So this is the one that's executing per request. I hit F5 and away we go. We're back in here and we see that that's there. Now I wonder, I should have done something fun with a variable there because we could have shown that a little bit differently. But back into the browser world here, I go and I look at my request to localhost, and my header indeed contains this identity cookie, which has any of those encrypted values that we had stored in here. So it'll actually contain all of these actually all of these values, but not this last one that we've added as part of the cycle. And so in a nutshell, that's what those different pieces look like.
So James, this is using cookie or cookies for identity. Can we just look quickly again at your startup in terms of how identity is configured?
Sure. So this one is using cookies. It's actually the default implementation. So when we look at startup over here, it's adding default identity. Right. And all I've done is add the default UI is for Bootstrap 4. That just does some of they've got some of the internal stuff now for the UI. I did have to add roles because I was trying to prove that the role piece would still work. And then it just adds the entity framework stores from the default generated application DB context. So there's no additional configuration required. If you wanted to use something else, then you could as well.
Cool.
So this one, though, this guy up here, this is the one that's part of cookies. This is the one that lives in that token that's generated, and that's the one that's going to keep growing if you add to it. That's the one that's persistent across browser sessions, but not user sessions. So when the user logs out, those will disappear. These ones only exist server side, and that's why it's here in the Razor page dumping out rather than fetching it in some other manner, which I don't know how you would do anyways, but yeah. So those are the basic mechanics of it.
All right, looks awesome. I'm definitely going to use this in future applications. It's just not true. I'm just going to make James write it for me in future applications.
That's your best plan.
Just what I did in the last application. So.
Do you know, the funny thing about that is that I was kind of the identity monster for a while, and then this last round of identity questions that's come over the last couple of months here, everybody but me has been answering these questions. So I don't know. I'm losing my title. Maybe I have to pass a torch to you, Simon.
Oh no, I don't want to have any involvement in identity.
Good enough.
All right. Well, thanks for watching, everybody, and remember to like, comment, share. And also, if you bake any cookies, we'd like you to ice it using our faces and then our URL right at the very bottom. So we'll see everybody on the next episode.